The Swiss Family Robinson by Johann David Weiss. This full-length reading was produced in 2002 by Books on Tape Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. This book is read by Jim Weiss. Chapter 1. For many days we had been tempest-tossed. 6 times had the darkness closed over a wild and terrific scene, and returning light as often brought but renewed distress, for the raging storm increased in fury until on the 7th day all hope was lost. We were driven completely out of our course. No conjecture could be formed as to our whereabouts. The crew had lost heart, and were utterly exhausted by incessant labor. The riven masts had gone by the board. Leaks had been sprung in every direction, and the water, which rushed in, gained upon us rapidly. Instead of reckless oaths, the seamen now uttered frantic cries to God for mercy, mingled with strange and often ludicrous vows to be performed should deliverance be granted. Every man on board alternately commended his soul to his Creator and strove to bethink himself of some means of saving his life. My heart sank as I looked round upon my family in the midst of these horrors. Our 4 young sons were overpowered by terror. "Dear children," said I, "if the Lord will, He can save us even from this fearful peril. If not, let us calmly yield our lives into His hand, and think of the joy and blessedness of finding ourselves forever and ever united in that happy home above." At these words, my weeping wife looked bravely up, and as the boys clustered around her, she began to cheer and encourage them with calm and loving words. I rejoiced to see her fortitude, though my heart was ready to break as I gazed on my dear ones. We knelt down together, one after another praying with deep earnestness and emotion. Fritz, in particular, besought help and deliverance for his dear parents and brothers, as though quite forgetting himself. Our hearts were soothed by the never-failing comfort of childlike, confiding prayer, and the horrors of our situation seemed less overwhelming. "Ah," thought I, "the Lord will hear our prayer. He will help us." Amid the roar of the thundering waves, I suddenly heard the cry of "Land! Land!" while at the same instant the ship struck with a frightful shock, which threw everyone to the deck and seemed to threaten her immediate destruction. Dreadful sounds betokened the breaking up of the ship, and the roaring waters poured in on all sides. Then the voice of the captain was heard above the tumult, shouting, "Lower away the boats! We are lost!" "Lost!" I exclaimed, and the word went like a dagger to my heart. But seeing my children's terror renewed, I composed myself, calling out cheerfully, "Take courage, my boys! We are all above water yet. There is the land not far off. Let us do our best to reach it. You know God helps those that help themselves." With that, I left them and went on deck. What was my horror when, through the foam and spray, I beheld the only remaining boat leave the ship, the last of the seamen spring into her and push off, regardless of my cries and entreaties that we might be allowed to share their slender chance of preserving their lives. My voice was drowned in the howling of the blast, and even had the crew wished it, the return of the boat was impossible. Casting my eyes despairingly around, I became gradually aware that our position was by no means hopeless, inasmuch as the stern of the ship containing our cabin was jammed between 2 high rocks, and was partly raised from among the breakers which dashed the forepart to pieces. As the clouds of mist and rain drove past, I could make out, through rents in the vaporous curtain, a line of rocky coast, and rugged as it was, my heart bounded towards it as a sign of help in the hour of need. Yet the sense of our lonely and forsaken condition weighed heavily upon me as I returned to my family, constraining myself to say with a smile, "Courage, dear ones! Although our good ship will never sail more, she is so placed that our cabin will remain above water, and tomorrow, if the wind and waves abate, I see no reason why we should not be able to get ashore." These few words had an immediate effect on the spirits of my children, who at once regarded our problematical chance of escaping as a happy certainty, and began to enjoy the relief from the violent pitching and rolling of the vessel. My wife, however, perceived my distress and anxiety in spite of my forced composure, and I made her comprehend our real situation, greatly fearing the effect of the intelligence on her nerves. Not for a moment did her courage and trust in Providence forsake her, and on seeing this, my fortitude revived. "We must find some food and take a good supper," said she. "It will never do to grow faint by fasting too long. We shall require our utmost strength tomorrow." Night drew on apace. The storm was as fierce as ever, and at intervals we were startled by crashes announcing further damage to our unfortunate ship. "God will help us soon now, won't he, Father?" said my youngest child. "You silly little thing," said Fritz, my eldest son, sharply. "Don't you know that we must not settle what God is to do for us? We must have patience and wait his time." "Very well said, had it been said kindly, Fritz, my boy. You too often speak harshly to your brothers, although you may not mean to do so." A good meal being now ready, my youngsters ate heartily, and retiring to rest was speedily fast asleep. Fritz, who was of an age to be aware of the real danger we were in, kept watch with us. After a long silence, "Father," said he, "don't you think we might contrive swimming belts for Mother and the boys? With those we might all escape to land, for you and I can swim." "Your idea is so good," answered I, "that I shall arrange something at once in case of an accident during the night." We immediately searched about for what would answer the purpose, and fortunately got hold of a number of empty flasks and tin canisters, which we connected two and two together, so as to form floats sufficiently buoyant to support a person in the water, and my wife and young sons each willingly put one on. I then provided myself with matches, knives, cord, and other portable articles, trusting that, should the vessel go to pieces before daylight, we might gain the shore, not wholly destitute. Fritz, as well as his brothers, now slept soundly. Throughout the night my wife and I maintained our prayerful watch, dreading at every fresh sound some fatal change in the position of the wreck. At length the faint dawn of day appeared. The long, weary night was over, and with thankful hearts we perceived that the gale had begun to moderate. Blue sky was seen above us, and the lovely hues of sunrise adorned the eastern horizon. I aroused the boys, and we assembled on the remaining portion of the deck, when they, to their surprise, discovered that no one else was on board. "Hello, Papa! What has become of everybody? Are the sailors gone? Have they taken away the boats? Oh, Papa, why did they leave us behind? What can we do by ourselves?" "My good children," I replied, "we must not despair, although we seem deserted. See how those on whose skill and good faith we depended have left us cruelly to our fate in the hour of danger. God will never do so. He has not forsaken us, and we will trust him still. Only let us bestir ourselves, and each cheerily do his best. Who has anything to propose?" "The sea will soon be calm enough for swimming," said Fritz. "And that would be all very fine for you," exclaimed Ernest. "But think of Mother and the rest of us. Why not build a raft and all get on shore together?" "We should find it difficult, I think, to make a raft that would carry us safe to shore. However, we must contrive something, and first let each try to procure what will be of most use to us." Away we all went to see what was to be found, I myself proceeding to examine, as of greatest consequence, the supplies of provisions and fresh water within our reach. My wife took her youngest son, Franz, to help her to feed the unfortunate animals on board, who were in a pitiful plight, having been neglected for several days. Fritz hastened to the arms chest, Ernest to look for tools, and Jack went towards the captain's cabin, the door of which he no sooner opened than out sprang two splendid large dogs, who testified their extreme delight and gratitude by such tremendous bounds that they knocked their little deliverer completely head over heels, frightening him nearly out of his wits. Jack did not long yield either to fear or anger. He presently recovered himself. The dogs seemed to ask pardon by vehemently licking his face and hands, and so, seizing the larger by the ears, he jumped on his back, and to my great amusement coolly rode to meet me as I came up the hatchway. When we reassembled in the cabin, we all displayed our treasures. Fritz brought a couple of guns, shot belt, powder flasks, and plenty of bullets. Ernest produced a cap full of nails, an axe, and a hammer, while pincers, chisels, and augers stuck out of all his pockets. Little Franz carried a box, and eagerly began to show us the nice, sharp little hooks it contained. "Well done, Franz," cried I. "These fish-hooks, which you, the youngest, have found, may contribute more than anything else in the ship to save our lives by procuring food for us. Fritz and Ernest, you have chosen well." "Will you praise me, too?" said my dear wife. "I have nothing to show, but I can give you good news. Some useful animals are still alive: a cow, a donkey, 2 goats, 6 sheep, a ram, and a fine sow. I was but just in time to save their lives by taking food to them." "All these things are excellent indeed," said I. "But my friend Jack here has presented me with a couple of huge, hungry, useless dogs, who will eat more than any of us." "Oh, Papa, they will be of use. Why, they will help us to hunt when we get on shore." "No doubt they will, if ever we do get on shore, Jack. But I must say I don't know how it is to be done." "Can't we each get into a big tub and float there?" returned he. "I have often sailed splendidly like that round the pond at home." "My child, you have hit on a capital idea," cried I. "Now, Ernest, let me have your tools, hammers, nails, saws, augers, and all, and then make haste to collect any tubs you can find." We very soon found 4 large casks made of sound wood and strongly bound with iron hoops. They were floating with many other things in the water in the hold, but we managed to fish them out and drag them to a suitable place for launching them. They were exactly what I wanted, and I succeeded in sawing them across the middle. Hard work it was, and we were glad enough to stop and refresh ourselves with wine and biscuits. My 8 tubs now stood ranged in a row near the water's edge, and I looked at them with great satisfaction. To my surprise, my wife did not seem to share my pleasure. "I shall never," said she, "muster courage to get into one of these." "Do not be too sure of that, dear wife. When you see my contrivance completed, you will perhaps prefer it to this immovable wreck." I next procured a long, thin plank on which my tubs could be fixed, and the 2 ends of this I bent upwards so as to form a keel. 2 other planks were nailed along the sides of the tubs. They also, being flexible, were brought to a point at each end, and all firmly secured and nailed together. I felt satisfied that in smooth water this craft would be perfectly trustworthy. But when we thought all was ready for the launch, we found, to our dismay, that the grand contrivance was so heavy and clumsy that even our united efforts could not move it an inch. "I must have a lever," cried I. "Run and fetch the capstan bar." Fritz quickly brought one, and having formed rollers by cutting up a long spar, I raised the forepart of my boat with the bar, and my sons placed a roller under it. "How is it, father," inquired Ernest, "that with that thing you alone can do more than all of us together?" I explained as well as I could in a hurry the principle of the lever, and promised to have a long talk on the subject of mechanics should we have a future opportunity. I now made fast a long rope to the stern of our boat, attaching the other end to a beam. Then, placing a second and third roller under it, we once more began to push, this time with success, and soon our gallant craft was safely launched. So swiftly indeed did she glide into the water that, but for the rope, she would have passed beyond our reach. The boys wished to jump in directly, but, alas, she leaned so much on one side that they could not venture to do so. Some heavy things being thrown in, however, the boat righted itself by degrees, and the boys were so delighted that they struggled which should first leap in to have the fun of sitting down in the tubs. But it was plain to me at once that something more was required to make her perfectly safe, so I contrived outriggers to preserve the balance, by nailing long poles across at the stem and stern, and fixing at the ends of each empty brandy casks. Then, the boat appearing steady, I got in, and turning it towards the most open side of the wreck, I cut and cleared away obstructions, so as to leave a free passage for our departure, and the boys brought oars to be ready for the voyage. This important undertaking we were forced to postpone until the next day, as it was, by this time, far too late to attempt it. It was not pleasant to have to spend another night in so precarious a situation, but yielding to necessity, we sat down to enjoy a comfortable supper, for during our exciting and incessant work all day we had taken nothing but an occasional biscuit and a little wine. We prepared for rest in a much happier frame of mind than on the preceding day, but I did not forget the possibility of a renewed storm, and therefore made every one put on the belts as before. Then, retiring to our berths, peaceful sleep prepared us all for the exertions of the coming day. We rose up betimes, for sleep weighs lightly on the hopeful as well as on the anxious. After kneeling together in prayer, "Now, my beloved ones," said I, "with God's help we are about to effect our escape. Let the poor animals we must leave behind be well fed, and put plenty of fodder within their reach. In a few days we may be able to return and save them likewise. After that, collect everything you can think of which may be of use to us." The boys joyfully obeyed me, and I selected from the large quantity of stores they got together canvas to make a tent, a chest of carpenter's tools, guns, pistols, powder, shot, and bullets, rods and fishing tackle, an iron pot, a case of portable soup, and another of biscuits. These useful articles, of course, took the place of the ballast I had hastily thrown in the day before. With a hearty prayer for God's blessing, we now began to take our seats, each in his tub. Just then we heard the cocks begin to crow, as though to reproach us for deserting them. "Why should not the fowls go with us?" exclaimed I. "If we find no food for them, they can be food for us." 10 hens and a couple of cocks were accordingly placed in one of the tubs, and secured with some wire netting over them. The ducks and geese were set at liberty, and took to the water at once, while the pigeons, rejoicing to find themselves on the wing, swiftly made for the shore. My wife, who managed all this for me, kept us waiting for her some little time, and came at last with a bag as big as a pillow in her arms. "This is my contribution," said she, throwing the bag to little Franz, to be, as I thought, a cushion for him to sit upon. All being ready, we cast off and moved away from the wreck. My good, brave wife sat in the first compartment of the boat. Next her was Franz, a pretty little boy nearly 8 years old. Then came Fritz, a handsome, spirited young fellow of 15. The 2 center tubs contained the valuable cargo. Then came our bold, thoughtless Jack. Next him, Ernest, my second son, intelligent, well-informed, and rather indolent. I myself, the anxious, loving father, stood in the stern, endeavoring to guide the raft with its precious burden to a safe landing place. The elder boys took the oars. Everyone wore a float belt and had something useful close to him in case of being thrown into the water. The tide was flowing, which was a great help to the young oarsmen. We emerged from the wreck and glided into the open sea. All eyes were strained to get a full view of the land, and the boys pulled with a will. But for some time we made no progress, as the boat kept turning round and round, until I hit upon the right way to steer it, after which we merrily made for the shore. We had left the 2 dogs, Turk and Juno, on the wreck, as being both large mastiffs, we did not care to have their additional weight on board our craft. But when they saw us apparently deserting them, they set up a piteous howl and sprang into the sea. I was sorry to see this, for the distance to the land was so great that I scarcely expected them to be able to accomplish it. They followed us, however, and occasionally resting their forepaws on the outriggers, kept up with us well. Jack was inclined to deny them this, their only chance of safety. "Stop," said I. "That would be unkind, as well as foolish. Remember, the merciful man regardeth the life of his beast." Our passage, though tedious, was safe. But the nearer we approached the shore, the less inviting it appeared. The barren rocks seemed to threaten us with misery and want. Many casks, boxes, and bales of goods floated on the water around us. Fritz and I managed to secure a couple of hogsheads so as to tow them alongside. With the prospect of famine before us, it was desirable to lay hold of anything likely to contain provisions. By and by, we began to perceive that, between and beyond the cliffs, green grass and trees were discernible. Fritz could distinguish many tall palms, and Ernest hoped they would prove to be coconut trees, and enjoyed the thoughts of drinking the refreshing milk. "I am very sorry I never thought of bringing away the captain's telescope," said I. "Oh, look here, father," cried Jack, drawing a little spyglass joyfully out of his pocket. By means of this glass I made out that at some distance to the left the coast was much more inviting. A strong current, however, carried us directly towards the frowning rocks, but I presently observed an opening where a stream flowed into the sea, and saw that our geese and ducks were swimming towards this place. I steered after them into the creek, and we found ourselves in a small bay or inlet, where the water was perfectly smooth and of moderate depth. The ground sloped gently upwards from the low banks to the cliffs, which here retired inland, leaving a small plain on which it was easy for us to land. Everyone sprang gladly out of the boat, but little Franz, who, lying packed in his tub like a potted shrimp, had to be lifted out by his mother. The dogs had scrambled on shore before us. They received us with loud barking and the wildest demonstrations of delight. The geese and ducks kept up an incessant din, added to which was the screaming and croaking of flamingos and penguins whose dominion we were invading. The noise was deafening, but far from unwelcome to me, as I thought of the good dinners the birds might furnish. As soon as we could gather our children around us on dry land, we knelt to offer thanks and praise for our merciful escape, and with full hearts we commended ourselves to God's good keeping for the time to come. All hands then briskly fell to the work of unloading, and oh, how rich we felt ourselves as we did so. The poultry we left at liberty to forage for themselves, and set about finding a suitable place to erect a tent in which to pass the night. This we speedily did, thrusting a long spar into a hole in the rock, and supporting the other end by a pole firmly planted in the ground, we formed a framework over which we stretched the sailcloth we had brought. Besides fastening this down with pegs, we placed our heavy chests and boxes on the corner of the canvas, and arranged hooks so as to be able to close up the entrance during the night. When this was accomplished, the boys ran to collect moss and grass to spread in the tent for our beds, while I arranged a fireplace with some large flat stones near the brook which flowed close by. Dry twigs and seaweed were soon in a blaze on the hearth. I filled the iron pot with water, and giving my wife several cakes of the portable soup, she established herself as our cook, with little Franz to help her. He, thinking his mother was melting some glue for carpentry, was eager to know what Papa was going to make next. "This is to be soup for your dinner, my child. Do you think these cakes look like glue?" "Yes, indeed, I do," replied Franz. "And I should not much like to taste glue soup. Don't you want some beef or mutton, Mamma?" "Where can I get it, dear?" said she. "We are a long way from a butcher's shop. But these cakes are made of the juice of good meat, boiled till it becomes a strong, stiff jelly. People take them when they go to sea, because on a long voyage they can only have salt meat, which will not make nice soup." Fritz, meanwhile, leaving a loaded gun with me, took another himself, and went along the rough coast to see what lay beyond the stream. This fatiguing sort of walk not suiting Ernest's fancy, he sauntered down to the beach, and Jack scrambled among the rocks, searching for shellfish. I was anxious to learn the 2 casks which were floating alongside our boat, but on attempting to do so, I found that I could not get them up the bank on which we had landed, and was therefore obliged to look for a more convenient spot. As I did so, I was startled by hearing Jack shouting for help, as though in great danger. He was at some distance, and I hurried towards him with a hatchet in my hand. The little fellow stood screaming in a deep pool, and as I approached, I saw that a huge lobster had caught his leg in its powerful claw. Poor Jack was in a terrible fright. Kick as he would, his enemy still clung on. I waded into the water, and seizing the lobster firmly by the back, managed to make it loosen its hold, and we brought it safe to land. Jack, having speedily recovered his spirits, and anxious to take such a prize to his mother, caught the lobster in both hands, but instantly received such a severe blow from its tail that he flung it down and passionately hit the creature with a large stone. This display of temper vexed me. "You are acting in a very childish way, my son," said I. "Never strike an enemy in a revengeful spirit." Once more lifting the lobster, Jack ran triumphantly towards the tent. "Mother, mother! A lobster! A lobster, Ernest! Look here, Franz! Mind he'll bite you! Where's Fritz?" All came crowding round Jack and his prize, wondering at its unusual size, and Ernest wanted his mother to make lobster soup directly, by adding it to what she was now boiling. She, however, begged to decline making any such experiment, and said she preferred cooking one dish at a time. Having remarked that the scene of Jack's adventure afforded a convenient place for getting my casks on shore, I returned thither and succeeded in drawing them up on the beach, where I set them on end and for the present left them. On my return I resumed the subject of Jack's lobster, and told him he should have the offending claw all to himself when it was ready to be eaten, congratulating him on being the first to discover anything useful. "As to that," said Ernest, "I found something very good to eat, as well as Jack, only I could not get at them without wetting my feet." "Pooh!" cried Jack. "I know what he saw. Nothing but some nasty mussels. I saw them too. Who wants to eat trash like that? Lobster for me." "I believe them to be oysters, not mussels," returned Ernest calmly. "Be good enough, my philosophical young friend, to fetch a few specimens of these oysters in time for our next meal," said I. "We must all exert ourselves, Ernest, for the common good, and pray never let me hear you object to wetting your feet. See how quickly the sun has dried Jack and me." "I can bring some salt at the same time," said Ernest. "I remarked a good deal lying in the crevices of the rocks. It tasted very pure and good, and I concluded it was produced by the evaporation of sea-water in the sun." "Extremely probable, learned sir," cried I. "But if you had brought a bagful of this good salt, instead of merely speculating so profoundly on the subject, it would have been more to the purpose. Run and fetch some directly." It proved to be salt, sure enough, although so impure that it seemed useless till my wife dissolved and strained it, when it became fit to put in the soup. "Why not use the sea-water itself?" asked Jack. "Because," said Ernest, "it is not only salt, but bitter too. Just try it." "Now," said my wife, tasting the soup with the stick with which she had been stirring it, "dinner is ready. But where can Fritz be?" she continued, a little anxiously. "How are we to eat our soup when it does come?" I asked. "We have neither plates nor spoons, and we can scarcely lift the boiling pot to our mouths. We are in as uncomfortable a position as was the fox to whom the stork served up a dinner in a jug with a long neck." "Oh, for a few coconut shells," sighed Ernest. "Oh, for half a dozen plates and as many silver spoons," rejoined I, smiling. "Really, though? Oyster shells would do," said he, after a moment's thought. "True. That is an idea worth having. Off with you, my boys. Get the oysters and clean out a few shells. What though our spoons have no handles, and we do burn our fingers a little in bailing the soup out." Jack was away and up to his knees in the water in a moment, detaching the oysters. Ernest followed more leisurely, and still unwilling to wet his feet, stood by the margin of the pool and gathered in his handkerchief the oysters his brother threw him. As he thus stood, he picked up and pocketed a large mussel shell for his own use. As they returned with a good supply, we heard a shout from Fritz in the distance. We returned it joyfully, and he presently appeared before us, his hands behind his back, and a look of disappointment upon his countenance. "Unsuccessful," said he. "Really," I replied. "Never mind, my boy. Better luck next time." "Oh, Fritz!" exclaimed his brothers, who had looked behind him. "A sucking pig! A little sucking pig! Where did you get it? How did you shoot it? Do let us see it." Fritz then, with sparkling eyes, exhibited his prize. "I am glad to see the result of your prowess, my boy," said I. "But I cannot approve of deceit even as a joke. Stick to the truth in jest and earnest." Fritz then told us how he had been to the other side of the stream. "So different from this," he said. "It is really a beautiful country, and the shore, which runs down to the sea in a gentle slope, is covered with all sorts of useful things from the wreck. Do let us go and collect them, And father, why should we not return to the wreck and bring off some of the animals? Just think of what value the cow would be to us, and what a pity it would be to lose her. Let us get her on shore, and we will move over the stream where she will have good pasturage, and we shall be in the shade instead of on this desert. And father, I do wish— Stop, my boy, cried I. All will be done in good time. Tomorrow and the day after will bring work of their own. And tell me, did you see no traces of our shipmates? Not a sign of them, either on land or sea, living or dead, he replied. But the sucking pig, said Jack, where did you get it? It was one of several, said Fritz, which I found on the shore. Most curious animals they are. They hopped rather than walked, and every now and then would squat down on their hind legs and rub their snouts with their forepaws. Had I not been afraid of losing them all, I would have tried to catch one alive. They seemed so tame. Meanwhile, Ernest had been carefully examining the animal in question. This is no pig, he said, and except for its bristly skin, does not look like one. See, its teeth are not like those of a pig, but rather those of a squirrel. In fact, he continued, looking at Fritz, your sucking pig is an agouti. Dear me, said Fritz, listen to the great professor lecturing. He is going to prove that a pig is not a pig. You need not be so quick to laugh at your brother, said I in my turn. He is quite right. I too know the agouti by descriptions and pictures, and there is little doubt that this is a specimen. The little animal is a native of North America, where it makes its nest under the roots of trees and lives upon fruit. But Ernest, the agouti not only looks something like a pig, but most decidedly grunts like a porker. While we were thus talking, Jack had been vainly endeavoring to open an oyster with his large knife. Here is a simpler way, said I, placing an oyster on the fire. It immediately opened. Now, I continued, who will try this delicacy? All at first hesitated to partake of them, so unattractive did they appear. Jack, however, tightly closing his eyes and making a face as though about to take medicine, gulped one down. We followed his example one after the other, each doing so rather to provide himself with a spoon than with any hope of cultivating a taste for oysters. Our spoons were now ready, and gathering around the pot, we dipped them in, not, however, without sundry scalded fingers. Ernest then drew from his pocket the large shell he had procured for his own use, and scooping up a good quantity of soup, he put it down to cool, smiling at his own foresight. Prudence should be exercised for others, I remarked. Your cool soup will do capitally for the dogs, my boy. Take it to them, and then come and eat like the rest of us. Ernest winced at this, but silently taking up his shell, he placed it on the ground before the hungry dogs, who lapped up its contents in a moment. He then returned, and we all went merrily on with our dinner. While we were thus busily employed, we suddenly discovered that our dogs, not satisfied with their mouthful of soup, had espied the agouti and were rapidly devouring it. Fritz, seizing his gun, flew to rescue it from their hungry jaws, and before I could prevent him, struck one of them with such force that his gun was bent. The poor beasts ran off howling, followed by a shower of stones from Fritz, who shouted and yelled at them so fiercely that his mother was actually terrified. I followed him, and as soon as he would listen to me, represented to him how despicable as well as wicked was such an outbreak of temper. For, said I, you have hurt, if not actually wounded, the dogs. You have distressed and terrified your mother, and spoiled your gun. Though Fritz's passion was easily aroused, it never lasted long, and speedily recovering himself, immediately he entreated his mother's pardon, and expressed his sorrow for his fault. By this time the sun was sinking beneath the horizon, and the poultry, which had been straying to some little distance, gathered round us, and began to pick up the crumbs of biscuit which had fallen during our repast. My wife hereupon drew from her mysterious bag some handfuls of oats, peas, and other grain, and with them began to feed the poultry. She at the same time showed me several other seeds of various vegetables. "That was indeed thoughtful," said I. "But pray be careful of what will be of such value to us. We can bring plenty of damaged biscuits from the wreck, which, though of no use as food for us, will suit the fowls very well indeed." The pigeons now flew up to crevices in the rocks, the fowls perched themselves on our tent pole, and the ducks and geese waddled off, cackling and quacking, to the marshy margin of the river. We too were ready for repose, and having loaded our guns, and offered up our prayers to God, thanking Him for His many mercies to us, we commended ourselves to His protecting care, and as the last ray of light departed, closed our tent and lay down to rest. The children remarked the suddenness of nightfall, for indeed there had been little or no twilight. This convinced me that we must be not far from the equator, for twilight results from the refraction of the sun's rays. The more obliquely these rays fall, the further does the partial light extend, while the more perpendicularly they strike the earth, the longer do they continue their undiminished force, until when the sun sinks, they totally disappear, thus producing sudden darkness. Chapter 2. We should have been badly off without the shelter of our tent, for the night proved as cold as the day had been hot, but we managed to sleep comfortably, everyone being thoroughly fatigued by the labors of the day. The voice of our vigilant cock, which as he loudly saluted the rising moon was the last sound I heard at night, roused me at daybreak, and I then awoke my wife, that in the quiet interval, while yet our children slept, we might take counsel together on our situation and prospects. It was plain to both of us that in the first place we should ascertain, if possible, the fate of our late companions, and then examine into the nature and resources of the country on which we were stranded. We therefore came to the resolution that, as soon as we had breakfasted, Fritz and I should start on an expedition with these objects in view, while my wife remained near our landing place with the 3 younger boys. Rouse up, my boys!" cried I, awakening the children cheerfully. "Come and help your mother to get breakfast ready." "As to that," said she, smiling, "we can but set on the pot and boil some more soup." "Why, you forget Jack's fine lobster," replied I. "What has become of it, Jack?" "It has been safe in this hole in the rock all night, father. You see, I thought as the dogs seem to like good things, they might take a fancy to that as well as the agouti." "A very sensible precaution," remarked I. "I believe even my heedless Jack will learn wisdom in time. It is well the lobster is so large, for we shall want to take part with us on our excursion today." At the mention of an excursion, the 4 children were wild with delight, and capering around me, clapped their hands for joy. "Steady there, steady," said I. "You cannot expect all to go. Such an expedition as this would be too dangerous and fatiguing for you younger ones. Fritz and I will go alone this time, with one of the dogs, leaving the other to defend you." We then armed ourselves, each taking a gun and a game bag, Fritz, in addition, sticking a pair of pistols in his belt, and I a small hatchet in mine. Breakfast being over, we stowed away the remainder of the lobster and some biscuits with a flask of water, and were ready for a start. We now found that the banks of the stream were on both sides so rocky that we could get down to the water by only one narrow passage, and there was no corresponding path on the other side. I was glad to see this, however, for I now knew that my wife and children were on a comparatively inaccessible spot, the other side of the tent being protected by steep and precipitous cliffs. Fritz and I pursued our way up the stream until we reached a point where the waters fell from a considerable height in a cascade, and where several large rocks lay half covered by the water. By means of these we succeeded in crossing the stream in safety. We thus had the sea on our left, and a long line of rocky heights, here and there adorned with clumps of trees, stretching away inland to the right. We had forced our way scarcely 50 yards through the long, rank grass, which was here partly withered by the sun and much tangled, when we heard behind us a rustling, and on looking round saw the grass waving to and fro as if some animal were passing through it. Fritz instantly turned and brought his gun to his shoulder, ready to fire the moment the beast should appear. I was much pleased with my son's coolness and presence of mind, for it showed me that I might thoroughly rely upon him on any future occasion when real danger might occur. This time, however, no savage beast rushed out, but our trusty dog, Turk, whom, in our anxiety at parting, we had forgotten, and who had been sent after us, doubtless, by my thoughtful wife. From this little incident, however, we saw how dangerous was our position, and how difficult escape would be should any fierce beast steal upon us unawares. We therefore hastened to make our way to the open seashore. Here the scene which presented itself was indeed delightful. A background of hills, the green waving grass, the pleasant groups of trees stretching here and there to the very water's edge, formed a lovely prospect. On the smooth sand we searched carefully for any trace of our hapless companions, but not the mark of a footstep could we find. "Shall I fire a shot or two?" said Fritz. "That would bring our companions if they are within hearing." "It would indeed," I replied, "or any savages that may be here. No, let us search diligently, but as quietly as possible." "But why, father, should we trouble ourselves about them at all? They left us to shift for ourselves, and I, for one, don't care to set eyes on them again." "You are wrong, my boy," said I. "In the first place, we should not return evil for evil. Then, again, they might be of great assistance to us in building a house of some sort. And lastly, you must remember that they took nothing with them from the vessel, and may be perishing of hunger." Thus talking, we pushed on until we came to a pleasant grove which stretched down to the water's edge. Here we halted to rest, seating ourselves under a large tree by a rivulet which murmured and splashed along its pebbly bed into the great ocean before us. 1,000 gaily plumaged birds flew twittering above us, and Fritz and I gazed up at them. My son suddenly started up. "A monkey!" he exclaimed. "I am nearly sure I saw a monkey." As he spoke, he sprang round to the other side of the tree, and in doing so stumbled over a round substance, which he handed to me, remarking as he did so that it was a round bird's nest, of which he had often heard. "You may have done so," said I, laughing, "but you need not necessarily conclude that every round hairy thing is a bird's nest. This, for instance, is not one, but a coconut." We split open the nut, but, to our disgust, found the kernel dry and uneatable. "Hullo!" cried Fritz. "I always thought a coconut was full of delicious sweet liquid, like almond milk." "So it is," I replied, "when young and fresh. But as it ripens, the milk becomes congealed, and in course of time is solidified into a kernel. This kernel then dries, as you see here. But when the nut falls on favorable soil, the germ within the kernel swells until it bursts through the shell, and taking root, springs up a new tree." "I do not understand," said Fritz, "how the little germ manages to get through this great thick shell, which is not like an almond or hazelnut shell that is divided down the middle already." "Nature provides for all things," I answered, taking up the pieces. "Look here. Do you see these 3 round holes near the stalk? It is through them that the germ obtains egress. Now let us find a good nut, if we can." As coconuts must be overripe before they fall naturally from the tree, it was not without difficulty that we obtained one in which the kernel was not dried up. When we succeeded, however, we were so refreshed by the fruit that we could defer the repast we called our dinner until later in the day, and so spare our stock of provisions. Continuing our way through a thicket, which was so densely overgrown with lianas that we had to clear a passage with our hatchets, we again emerged on the seashore beyond, and found an open view, the forest sweeping inland, while on the space before us stood at intervals single trees of remarkable appearance. These at once attracted Fritz's observant eye, and he pointed to them, exclaiming, "Oh, what absurd-looking trees, father! See what strange bumps there are on the trunks." We approached to examine them, and I recognized them as calabash trees, the fruit of which grows in this curious way on the stems, and is a species of gourd, from the hard rind of which bowls, spoons, and bottles can be made. "The savages," I remarked, "are said to form these things most ingeniously, using them to contain liquids. Indeed, they actually cook food in them." "Oh, but that is impossible," returned Fritz. "I am quite sure this rind would be burnt through directly it was set on the fire." I did not say it was set on the fire at all. When the gourd has been divided in two, and the shell or rind emptied of its contents, it is filled with water, into which the fish, or whatever is to be cooked, is put. Red-hot stones are added until the water boils. The food becomes fit to eat, and the gourd rind remains uninjured. "That is a very clever plan, very simple, too. I dare say I should have hit on it if I had tried," said Fritz. "The friends of Columbus thought it very easy to make an egg stand upon its end when he had shown them how to do it. But now suppose we prepare some of these calabashes, that they may be ready for use when we take them home." Fritz instantly took up one of the gourds and tried to split it equally with his knife, but in vain. The blade slipped, and the calabash was cut jaggedly. "What a nuisance," said Fritz, flinging it down. "The thing is spoiled, and yet it seemed so simple to divide it properly." "Stay," said I. "You are too impatient. Those pieces are not useless. Do you try to fashion from them a spoon or two, while I provide a dish." I then took from my pocket a piece of string, which I tied tightly round a gourd as near one end of it as I could. Then, tapping the string with the back of my knife, it penetrated the outer shell. When this was accomplished, I tied the string yet tighter, and drawing the ends with all my might, the gourd fell, divided exactly as I wished. "That is clever," cried Fritz. "What in the world put that plan into your head?" "It is a plan," I replied, "which the Negroes adopt, as I have learned from reading books of travel." "Well, it certainly makes a capital soup tureen, and a soup plate, too," said Fritz, examining the gourd. "But supposing you had wanted to make a bottle, how would you have set to work?" "It would be an easier operation than this, if possible. All that is necessary is to cut a round hole at one end, then to scoop out the interior and to drop in several shot or stones. When these are shaken, any remaining portions of the fruit are detached, and the gourd is thoroughly cleaned and the bottle completed." "That would not make a very convenient bottle, though, father. It would be more like a barrel." "True, my boy. If you want a more shapely vessel, you must take it in hand when it is younger. To give it a neck, for instance, you must tie a bandage round the young gourd while it is still on the tree, and then all will swell but that part which you have checked." As I spoke, I filled the gourds with sand and left them to dry, marking the spot that we might return for them on our way back. For 3 hours or more we pushed forward, keeping a sharp lookout on either side for any trace of our companions, till we reached a bold promontory stretching some way into the sea, from whose rocky summit I knew that we should obtain a good and comprehensive view of the surrounding country. With little difficulty we reached the top, but the most careful survey of the beautiful landscape failed to show us the slightest sign or trace of human beings. Before us stretched a wide and lovely bay, fringed with yellow sands, either side extending into the distance, and almost lost to view in two shadowy promontories. Enclosed by these two arms lay a sheet of rippling water, which reflected in its depths the glorious sun above. The scene inland was no less beautiful, and yet Fritz and I both felt a shade of loneliness stealing over us as we gazed on its utter solitude. "Cheer up, Fritz, my boy," said I presently. "Remember that we chose a settler's life long ago, before we left our own dear country. We certainly did not expect to be so entirely alone, but what matters a few people more or less? With God's help, let us endeavor to live here contentedly, thankful that we were not cast upon some bare and inhospitable island. But come, the heat here is getting unbearable. Let us find some shady place before we are completely broiled away." We descended the hill and made for a clump of palm trees, which we saw at a little distance. To reach this we had to pass through a dense thicket of reeds, no pleasant or easy task, for besides the difficulty of forcing our way through, I feared at every step that we might tread on some venomous snake. Sending Turk in advance, I cut one of the reeds, thinking it would be a more useful weapon against a reptile than my gun. I had carried it but a little way when I noticed a thick juice exuding from one end. I tasted it, and to my delight found it sweet and pleasant. I at once knew that I was standing amongst sugar canes. Wishing Fritz to make the same discovery, I advised him to cut a cane for his defense. He did so, and as he beat the ground before him, the reed split, and his hand was covered with the juice. He carefully touched the cane with the tip of his tongue. Then, finding the juice sweet, he did so again with less hesitation, and a moment afterwards sprang back to me, exclaiming, "Oh, father, sugar canes! Sugar canes! Taste it! Oh, how delicious, how delightful! Do let us take a lot home to mother," he continued, sucking eagerly at the cane. "Gently there," said I. "Take breath a moment. Moderation in all things, remember. Cut some to take home if you like, only don't take more than you can conveniently carry." In spite of my warning, my son cut a dozen or more of the largest canes, and stripping them of their leaves, carried them under his arm. We then pushed through the cane brake and reached the clump of palms for which we had been making. As we entered it, a troop of monkeys, who had been disporting themselves on the ground, sprang up, chattering and grimacing, and before we could clearly distinguish them, were at the very top of the trees. Fritz was so provoked by their impertinent gestures that he raised his gun and would have shot one of the poor beasts. "Stay!" cried I. "Never take the life of any animal needlessly. A live monkey up in that tree is of more use to us than a dozen dead ones at our feet, as I will show you." Saying this, I gathered a handful of small stones and threw them up towards the apes. The stones did not go near them, but influenced by their instinctive mania for imitation, they instantly seized all the coconuts within their reach and sent a perfect hail of them down upon us. Fritz was delighted with my stratagem, and rushing forward picked up some of the finest of the nuts. We drank the milk they contained, drawing it through the holes which I pierced, and then, splitting the nuts open with the hatchet, ate the cream which lined their shells. After this delicious meal, we thoroughly despised the lobster we had been carrying and threw it to Turk, who ate it gratefully. But far from being satisfied, the poor beast began to gnaw the ends of the sugar canes and to beg for coconut. I slung a couple of the nuts over my shoulder, fastening them together by their stalks, and Fritz having resumed his burden, we began our homeward march. I soon discovered that Fritz found the weight of his canes considerably more than he expected. He shifted them from shoulder to shoulder, then for a while carried them under his arm, and finally stopped short with a sigh. "I had no idea," he said, "that a few reeds would be so heavy." "Never mind, my boy," I said. "Patience and courage. Do you not remember the story of Aesop and his bread basket? How heavy he found it when he started, and how light at the end of his journey? Let us each take a fresh staff, and then fasten the bundle crosswise with your gun." We did so, and once more stepped forward. Fritz presently noticed that I, from time to time, sucked the end of my cane. "Oh, come," said he, "that's a capital plan of yours, father. I'll do that too." So saying, he began to suck most vigorously, but not a drop of the juice could he extract. "How is this?" he asked. "How do you get the juice out, father?" "Think a little," I replied. "You are quite as capable as I am of finding out the way, even if you do not know the real reason of your failure." "Oh, of course," said he. "It is like trying to suck marrow from a marrow-bone without making a hole at the other end." "Quite right," I said. "You form a vacuum in your mouth and the end of your tube, and expect the air to force down the liquid from the other end, which it cannot possibly enter." Fritz was speedily perfect in the accomplishment of sucking sugar cane, discovering by experience the necessity for a fresh cut at each joint or knot in the cane, through which the juice could not flow. He talked of the pleasure of initiating his brothers in the art, and of how Ernest would enjoy the coconut milk with which he had filled his flask. "My dear boy," said I, "you need not have added that to your load. The chances are it is vinegar by the time we get home. In the heat of the sun, it will ferment soon after being drawn from the nut." "Vinegar? Oh, that would be a horrid bore. I must look directly and see how it is getting on," cried Fritz, hastily swinging the flask from his shoulder and tugging out the cork. With a loud pop, the contents came forth, foaming like champagne. "There now," said I, laughing as he tasted this new luxury. "You will have to exercise moderation again, friend Fritz. I dare say it is delicious, but it will go to your head if you venture deep into your flask." "My dear father, you cannot think how good it is. Do take some. Vinegar, indeed. This is like excellent wine." We were both invigorated by this unexpected draught, and went on so merrily after it that the distance to the place where we had left our gourd dishes seemed less than we expected. We found them quite dry and very light and easy to carry. Just as we had passed through the grove in which we breakfasted, Turk suddenly darted away from us and sprang furiously among a troop of monkeys, which were gambolling playfully on the turf at a little distance from the trees. They were taken by surprise completely, and the dog, now really ravenous from hunger, had seized and was fiercely tearing one to pieces before we could approach the spot. His luckless victim was the mother of a tiny little monkey, which, being on her back when the dog flew at her, had hindered her flight. The little creature attempted to hide among the grass, and in trembling fear watched the tragic fate of its mother. On perceiving Turk's bloodthirsty design, Fritz had eagerly rushed to the rescue, flinging away all he was carrying, and losing his hat in his haste. All to no purpose as far as the poor mother ape was concerned, and a laughable scene ensued. For no sooner did the young monkey catch sight of him than at one bound it was on his shoulders, and holding fast by his thick curly hair, it firmly kept its seat in spite of all he could do to dislodge it. He screamed and plunged about as he endeavored to shake or pull the creature off, but all in vain. It only clung the closer to his neck, making the most absurd grimaces. I laughed so much at this ridiculous scene that I could scarcely assist my terrified boy out of his awkward predicament. At last, by coaxing the monkey, offering it a bit of biscuit, and gradually disentangling its small sinewy paws from the curls it grasped so tightly, I managed to relieve poor Fritz, who then looked with interest at the baby ape, no bigger than a kitten, as it lay in my arms. "What a jolly little fellow it is!" exclaimed he. "Do let me try to rear it, father. I dare say coconut milk would do until we can bring the cow and the goats from the wreck. If he lives, he might be useful to us. I believe monkeys instinctively know what fruits are wholesome and what are poisonous." "Well," said I, "let the little orphan be yours. You bravely and kindly exerted yourself to save the mother's life. Now you must train her child carefully, for unless you do so, its natural instinct will prove mischievous instead of useful to us." Turk was meanwhile devouring with great satisfaction the little animal's unfortunate mother. I could not grudge it him, and continued hunger might have made him dangerous to ourselves. We did not think it necessary to wait until he had dined, so we prepared to resume our march. The tiny ape seated itself in the coolest way imaginable on Fritz's shoulder. I helped to carry his canes, and we were on some distance before Turk overtook us, looking uncommonly well pleased, and licking his chops as though recalling the memory of his feast. He took no notice of the monkey, but it was very uneasy at sight of him, and scrambled down into Fritz's arms, which was so inconvenient to him that he devised a plan to relieve himself of his burden. Calling Turk, and seriously enjoining obedience, he seated the monkey on his back, securing it there with a cord, and then putting a second string round the dog's neck that he might lead him, he put a loop of the knot into the comical rider's hand, saying gravely, "Having slain the parent, Mr. Turk, you will please to carry the son." At first this arrangement mightily displeased them both, but by and by they yielded to it quietly. The monkey especially amused us by riding along with the air of a person perfectly at his ease. "We look just like a couple of mountebanks on their way to a fair with animals to exhibit," said I. "What an outcry the children will make when we appear." My son inquired to what species of the monkey tribe I thought his protégé belonged, which led to a good deal of talk on the subject, and conversation beguiling the way, we found ourselves ere long on the rocky margin of the stream, and close to the rest of our party. Juno was the first to be aware of our approach, and gave notice of it by loud barking, to which Turk replied with such hearty good will that his little rider, terrified at the noise his steed was making, slipped from under the cord and fled to his refuge on Fritz's shoulder, where he regained his composure and settled himself comfortably. Turk, who by this time knew where he was, finding himself free, dashed forward to rejoin his friend and announce our coming. One after another, our dear ones came running to the opposite bank, testifying in various ways their delight at our return, and hastening up on their side of the river, as we on ours, to the ford at which we had crossed in the morning. We were quickly on the other side, and full of joy and affection, our happy party was once more united. The boys, suddenly perceiving the little animal which was clinging close to their brother, in alarm at the tumult of voices, shouted in ecstasy, "A monkey! A monkey! Oh, how splendid! Where did Fritz find him? What may we give him to eat? Oh, what a bundle of sticks! Look at those curious great nuts father has got!" We could neither check this confused torrent of questions, nor get in a word in answer to them. At length, when the excitement subsided a little, I was able to say a few words with a chance of being listened to. "I am truly thankful to see you all safe and well, and thank God, our expedition has been very satisfactory, except that we have entirely failed to discover any trace of our shipmates." "If it be the will of God," said my wife, "to leave us alone on this solitary place, let us be content and rejoice that we are all together in safety. Now we want to hear all your adventures, and let us relieve you of your burdens," added she, taking my game bag. Jack shouldered my gun, Ernest took the coconuts, and little Franz carried the gourds. Fritz distributed the sugar canes amongst his brothers, and handing Ernest his gun, replaced the monkey on Turk's back. Ernest soon found the burden with which Fritz had laden him too heavy to his taste. His mother, perceiving this, offered to relieve him of part of the load. He gave up willingly the coconuts, but no sooner had he done so than his elder brother exclaimed, "Hello, Ernest! You surely do not know what you are parting with. Did you really intend to hand over those good coconuts without so much as tasting them?" "What ho! Are they really coconuts?" cried Ernest. "Do let me take them again, mother. Do let me look at them." "No, thank you," replied my wife with a smile. "I have no wish to see you again overburdened. Oh, but I have only to throw away these sticks, which are of no use, and then I can easily carry them." "Worse and worse," said Fritz. "I have a particular regard for those heavy, useless sticks. Did you ever hear of sugar canes?" The words were scarcely out of his mouth when Ernest began to suck vigorously at the end of the cane, with no better result, however, than Fritz had obtained as we were on the march. "Here," said Fritz, "let me show you the trick of it." And he speedily set all the youngsters to work extracting the luscious juice. My wife, as a prudent housekeeper, was no less delighted than the children with this discovery. The sight of the dishes also pleased her greatly, for she longed to see us eat once more like civilized beings. We went into the kitchen, and there found preparations for a truly sumptuous meal. 2 forked sticks were planted in the ground on either side of the fire. On these rested a rod, from which hung several tempting-looking fish. Opposite them hung a goose from a similar contrivance, slowly roasting while the gravy dropped into a large shell placed beneath it. In the center sat the great pot, from which issued the smell of a most delicious soup. To crown this splendid array stood an open hogshead full of Dutch cheeses. All this was very pleasant to 2 hungry travelers. But I was about to beg my wife to spare the poultry until our stock should have increased, when she, perceiving my thought, quickly relieved my anxiety. "This is not one of our geese," she said, "but a wild bird Ernest killed." "Yes," said Ernest. "It is a penguin, I think. It let me get quite close, so that I knocked it on the head with a stick."
This book is continued on Disc 2.